Hey, I'm Eric Keach, and I'm here with Joe DeFranco. And we're here because we got something pretty special for you. Now, you hear the phrase that speed kills. There's a lot of things on how to do it, but there's also a big misunderstanding when it comes to why to do it. We're here today to kind of break that down for you. So, Joe, what I'm going to do is I want to kind of jump right into this with you. And the first question I have is you hear it a lot, but I mean, isn't speed training just speed training? And like, what's so different about everything?
No, it's definitely not. I think that's where a lot of old school coaches and that mentality has, lingered into today's world where everybody just thinks you go out and run and you get faster. And nothing could be further from the truth. And another big misconception is that a lot of the information obviously is from track athletes and coaches because speed is their sport. So team sport athletes just borrow whatever they learned or read from the track athletes, and then they incorporate that into their own training. So even athletes that are, that know that speed isn't just going out and going for a run, they're getting their information from the wrong places because team sports are drastically different than just running, 100 meters or 200 meters.
You got any examples or stories of maybe in times like that type of training that you see someone who's carried it over, or they thought that was the best way to do it and it really wasn't?
Well, I think we have a ton of, you get a lot of high school and college kids that were doing a lot more track work, and then you see their times are coming down and they're getting faster in the gym or on the track, but then you watch them play their sport and they don't look fast. They look kind of tight and stiff and a little bit slow, and a lot of times it's because that the speed training they're doing isn't carrying over. And I think the biggest difference is with track, max velocity and running in a linear straight line is the sport where 99% of team sports are played in acceleration with rapid changes of direction. So, I mean, I have literally every athlete that's ever come in our doors from grade school level to the professional that trained, more like a track athlete, didn't really see their speed gains transfer over to the athletic field until they started following some of the techniques that we teach.
Okay, and I mean, I'm just kind of curious. Why do you think, without obviously going into too much detail, but why do you think that's the case? Like, it hasn't carried over as much as maybe it should?
I think, again, because you're training a completely different aspect of what your sport dictates. So we train athletes from all different walks of life, but just as an example everybody could relate to, if you watch a football game, we're in the middle of playoff season right now as we're doing this interview. Watch a full game for 3 hours and tell me how many times you see an athlete run in a straight line without any kind of duress for 40, 50, or 100 yards. If it happens once in a game, it's a lot. So I think if that's all you're training, then you bring yourself out onto the athletic field and the game is played almost in this 10-yard box of rapid changes of direction and having to overcome resistance and people trying to tackle you and block you. It's a completely different animal, and that's why they must be separated as far as training for them. And you could take that example with baseball, volleyball, basketball. You could take that same example and see how drastically it's different from just training a track sprinter.
All right, now there's a big buzzword that you hear going around now, and they talk about stride length, and this is this key thing with everything. Kind of first thing I want you to do is basically explain to me kind of what the stride length thing is, the theory behind it, and maybe why it's so popular right now.
Well, I mean, I'd like to think we kind of helped popularize it in that we're we place a huge emphasis on improving an athlete's stride length. In our speed DVD and manual, we have a 15-year study literally that we did with over 7,000 athletes where we recorded the data on how fast they ran a 10-yard sprint electronically and a 40-yard dash, took the fastest times, counted how many steps they took, and the results we got were very interesting. I'll just say that stride length plays a huge role in that. And but again, the problem is I think a lot of people don't know how to train for stride length. So the first thing they'll do is if a coach just says, hey man, take bigger strides, take bigger steps. First thing an athlete's going to do is take a real big step out in front. And as soon as you overstride and overreach and your foot lands out in front of your center of gravity, that is the #1 way to pull a hamstring when sprinting. So That's number one. It's going to cause injury. Number two is if you're lucky enough not to pull your hamstring, you're going to actually be slower. If you could think of your foot landing out in front of your hip every time you take a step, it's going to create what we call a braking force. I always say, imagine if I was riding on my bike and I had my arm out. Every time I went by a tree, I kept my arm out. The tree would whack my arm. I'd kind of stop and stop and stop, as opposed to taking my arm and pushing off the tree. That's what happens when your foot lands underneath your hip. You actually accelerate and propel yourself forward and increase speed with each step. But everybody's running with their arm out, so to speak, by taking these big strides, and they're creating this braking force and slowing themselves down, or causing hamstring problems, which is not going to help your speed at all.
All right, so you kind of talked about the stride length and that being so important, but also if they're overstepping, it can cause hamstring issues. It can cause the braking forces and having them slow down. I know you've got a story or two about, I guess, changing someone's stride length that improved them. So share those with me.
Yeah, the first one I'll give you is our cover boy for speed, Keith Williams, who played defensive back in the CFL. He showed up at my gym as the fastest 10-yard sprint electrically timed that we ever had. First day he got there, he ran a 1.58 electric, which is, anybody who's familiar with electric times, it's blazing fast. And he always said any coach he worked with kind of just said run. He was the guy that you just said run, because genetically, I mean, he's just a fast kid, and nobody really touched him because they were afraid of screwing him up. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right, type of thing. But when he ran his 10-yard sprint at our gym, I mean, first thing I noticed was this dude is blazing. He's explosive. He's fast. But we videotaped it, and he took 7.5 steps to run 10 yards. Very, very short, but very, very quick. But I always tell my athletes it's almost like they're getting nowhere fast. Now, he was actually, he was getting somewhere. He was fast. But it was just too many steps, almost like the Road Runner, or Fred Flintstone trying to start his car. His legs are going 100 miles an hour, but he wasn't covering ground. And what we did with Keith is all we did was shave 1 step off of his 10, just from going from 7.5 steps to 6.5 steps. Over the course of a couple weeks, he went from a 1.58 electric 10-yard sprint to a 1.48. And anybody who knows anything about sprinting, a full 10th electrically timed over the course of just 10 yards
huge.
Isn't a big difference, is enormous. That's like, putting 100 pounds on your bench press kind of thing. So, and all we did was take 1 step off of his 10-yard sprint. And it was hard for him to, understand and feel, because technically the frequency is slower. So in his brain, he felt slower, but he was covering more ground. So he was getting there faster, even though his legs weren't moving as fast, if that makes sense. And again, that's why we do all the sprint training. We electrically time, so there's no human error. And he was able to, see that it might feel a little bit slower, but by covering more ground and improving your stride length, we're really, shaving time off. And that took him from a 4.3 second 40-yard dash to a 4.21, which is, bordering 4.1, which is really world-class speed. But again, it's a very powerful story, and a guy that anybody could, take an average kid, and more things will work for an average kid. You just generally get them in shape, and they might run a little faster. But when you take an elite athlete and you make him more elite and faster, it's pretty powerful, and it all started with shaving 1 step off of his 10-yard sprint.
Yeah, and at that level, it's that much harder to make them that much faster, because they're already fine-tuned and everything. Like, you start with a young kid, right? He's got so many things that need to be worked on, but this guy was so fast coming in, and you make these changes, and it's huge change to all that.
And it's, just neurologically, he's been running the way he's run for, he was 24 years old at the time, 25. So, that's the motor program is engraved in there. With a younger kid, you kind of have a blank slate. So it is definitely a lot harder, actually, but we were able to do it. And mobility, I will say, played a huge role too. It wasn't just the technical aspect of it. Keith is very strong, but very kind of tight, jacked, powerful guy. But the immobility in his hips played a role in him taking these short steps because he didn't have the the length in his hip flexors to finish each stride. So it wasn't just making him run, 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 run. We had to find the cause of the problem, and a major cause was an immobility in his hips, and it took a little time to correct. But once we corrected that, like I said, now he's kind of reset, and he'll run any a 1:52 on any given day. So his new average time is set at a much faster time than even his PR was a year ago.
All right, so I'm going to break that down a little bit more, kind of the English terms, just for in case anybody who's watching. You're talking about immobility in the hips. I know what it means. I've been doing this for years. You obviously know what it means. But just kind of in his issue, what was it that was, the immobility? What was it? Is it tightness? What is it?
Basically, in all sports, especially football, you're always taught get low. It's all about leverage. So think of just a universal athletic stance, whether it's a shortstop in baseball or a linebacker in football. It's that universal kind of quarter squat, half squat position. He plays defense, so it's always getting low, tackling people. So he's developed a lot of strength, but his hip flexors have shortened over the course of many years of lifting weights, playing football, sitting at the computer, being in class, driving, like an average, 40, 50-year-old guy who sits behind the computer all day. There are similarities even with elite athletes in that you see some of these tightness and immobility issues. So namely the hip flexors, his glutes, his adductors as well got very shortened and strong, but very tight. So when his foot would strike the ground, if you could picture somebody running when the foot strikes the ground and it cycles back, he wasn't able to cycle or push all the way back before performing the next step. Foot would kind of push halfway back and then pop right back up to take the next step because, your brain, the Golgi tendon organ, will sense in your body if something is about to pull or tear, and it protects it by contracting. So if my hip flexors are stretching a little bit too fast, too much, I'm going to contract them and, prevent them from tearing, basically, or pulling. It's a protective mechanism in your body. So we needed to reset that and really work on through proper warm-up and pre-training. He had a whole pre-warm-up routine where we did tons of mobility work for his hip, self-myofascial release with the lacrosse ball and foam roller, traction. We did everything known to mankind to get those hips more mobile, and now we got him there, and it made a huge difference in his speed.
Now, obviously, he's been doing this for so long. He's had coaches, that he was fast to begin with. You said some of the coaches don't touch him because it's going to make it, it's going to make him worse. But, the coaches understand a lot of the stuff about stride length and frequency and things like that. And they've been doing this for years. But would you say that some of the coaches, maybe what they're saying in terms of some of the stuff might be wrong? Even though they've been doing it for years?
And I think it's something that we touch upon in the Speed DVD and the manual is you need to be well-versed as far as the technical considerations of different aspects of the sprint. But especially with team sport athletes, you need to, throw out the right coaching cues. So again, to go back to a perfect example is, a coach may have heard, hey, big steps is the way to go. Covering more ground is the way to go with regards to acceleration. But if I take a kid and I just say, hey, take bigger steps, take bigger strides, but I'm not telling him how and the body angles, and he might not have the strength and the mobility to do what I'm telling him, he's going to end up doing it wrong, and that could end up doing more harm than good. So, I see there's a lot of common, we actually go over them in the manual, common coaching cues that could actually screw an athlete up, like, pump your knees up isn't always the best cue. Take bigger strides isn't always the best cue. You need to understand the technical aspects of the sprint and then give cues that the athlete understands and then is physically able to achieve. And if he's not, you have to take the necessary steps to make him achieve those. So you have to, find the flaw, but then you have to fix it. And it's not always just running more.
All right, so and that's a huge thing in terms of like the cueing, right? Like you said, you could tell somebody some people say, well, run with your knees up, but that could automatically put that kid in a position to start doing high knees instead of putting the force into the ground, right?
Exactly, and you don't. I always tell my athletes, you can't be faster in the air. So if your knees are they're leaning back and they're pumping their knees up, real high. That's not going to, especially in acceleration, we're looking to apply force back into the ground, which will propel you forward. So again, coach might be trying to help. He might know in his head, what we're trying to achieve, but the wrong coaching cue can kill an athlete. And so that's why we place an emphasis. We have actually a whole section on overcoaching and giving the proper coaching cues, keeping them simple, one coaching cue at a time, not 10 random things while the kid is running. But it is a really, really big aspect of getting an athlete faster.
Cool. Speaking of big aspects, one of the other things is, everybody coaches know speed kills, all this stuff. Trying to find it, I guess, in terms of fitting it in terms of volume in the program and setting things up right is always an issue because coaches got so much going on in terms of stuff. So talk to me a little bit about the volume in terms of how the training process is laid out and finding time so the coach can kind of maybe fit this in their program.
Yeah, well, first of all, what volume is, you measure speed volume in distance. So how we always start, we could start as, short as 50 to 60 yards for a new athlete. Say, again, we'll stick with acceleration. If I'm teaching an athlete how to accelerate properly, I want quality reps. I don't want to burn them out. Again, the longest chapter in the book, not to get off on a tangent, is speed and conditioning are not the same thing. We're talking about getting an athlete faster, different than conditioning. And most coaches use that term wrong to begin with. But we might start as low as 50 to 60 yards, which may be 5 or 6 10-yard sprints. So you always want to, manage the volume. The next week we come back, we might bump that up to 80 yards. And we might go anywhere from 50 to 60 yards up to 200, 250 yards over the course of a 10 to 12 week period and make sure we are, progressing properly so the athlete can actually, adapt to the new stimulus and get better, as opposed to many coaches I don't think they really even chart volume. They just kind of go out and run. And then the next day, whatever they feel like doing, they run again. We have a bunch, I think 4 or 5 different progressions in the manual where we go over categorizing some of the starts from starts that create the least amount of force or demand the least amount of force, and then progress to the most amount of force. So you're not throwing the kitchen sink at an athlete, you're starting him slow. And as he gets faster and his body becomes acclimated, you're doing exercises and start variations that produce more force. And I don't think, coaches this doesn't even cross their mind. You just go out and you run. And, the volume of speed training is huge, and progressing properly is huge. And not throwing, again, I keep saying not throwing the kitchen sink at your athletes. I think another big problem is coach might learn something new and then he throws that in. And then the next week he learns something new and he throws that in. If you add a new stimulus, whether it's a different sprint variation or we go from 10-yard sprints to 20-yard sprints, anytime we add a new stimulus, you want to have a repeat or a reduction in the volume from the previous week. So, if we did 140 total yards of sprint work the previous week, but now I'm adding a new start variation, which is a little more taxing on the body, I'm not going to add more volume and this new start variation. So maybe I'll drop back down to 100 yards of volume because I added this new stimulus, a tougher start variation, then we'll work him back up. So that's super important to know, and something we cover in detail in the manual aspect of our speed program.
Okay, so basically you're saying adding something new, you basically pull back on the volume.
Always.
Okay. Now, something else I know that is really important, and it's something that everybody thinks acceleration and speed is, real important, but there's another area that's not just as important as acceleration, but it's something that coaches need to look out for, and probably slowing down. So talk about the deceleration aspect and how important this is to everything.
Yeah, it's the most overlooked component of getting faster would probably be getting slower, if that makes sense, where it's not as fun. Athletes want to know your 40 time. They want to know how high your vertical jump is. They don't want to know how well you land or how well you stop. But training for deceleration is actually more important than acceleration and speed, Because if you could think about, I always tell my athletes, it's like, would you get in an airplane and take off with a pilot that's world renowned for taking off, but he never got his landing license? That's not going to end well. Or, it kind of helps people, put things in perspective. Like, wow, yeah, if I could take off, but man, I don't have the necessary equipment and knowledge to land. And again, focusing on team sport athletes, the game is played regardless of what game you choose, acceleration and rapid changes of direction, which means you accelerate, you decelerate, you absorb transfer forces, reaccelerate, absorb transfer forces. It's all about deceleration. And I think it's important for athletes and coaches to know that the number one cause of ACL tears and injuries in high school athletes are non-contact injuries, cutting or landing improperly from a jump. So if you're not addressing this aspect in your training, you're missing more than half the boat. And if it was a test, you would basically fail.
Do you have any stories or examples about this that maybe, that type of training has helped somebody or come back maybe from an injury or something like that?
We have, again, there's, countless stories, but one that sticks out in my head because it was early on in my career, and this girl has been with me to this day now. She now plays pro volleyball and beach volleyball. A girl by the name of Rachel Bello. Anybody who follows my website or my stuff has probably seen her. She's a very high-level volleyball player. She came to me as a sophomore in high school. Blown out knee, torn ACL, and the worst ankle break I've ever seen in my life. To this day, she's got maybe 2-inch thick scar, maybe 8 to 10 inches long down her ankle. Literally shattered her ankle for, I don't have a better term for it. Broke every bone, shattered her ankle, and tore her ACL. Again, she was only a sophomore, but considered high level at this point.
Do you know how she did it? Like what she was doing that caused it?
Yes, landing from a jump during a volleyball match, and she came to me post-op, and she was just able to jog and do some things. And I asked her how she was training, and it was just volleyball, and some sprint work, short sprint work that her coach had her doing at the time. This is 14 years ago now too, and asked her what she did strength-wise, and did she ever focus on eccentric strength or deceleration, slowing down from a sprint. And her coach looked at me like, no, why would we do that? And then again, I reiterated, said, how did you do this again? Oh, I landed wrong. I always noticed when I land, my knees kind of collapse in. Is that bad? And she just didn't have the foundation to play at the level she was playing. And again, it's an accident waiting to happen. It's that airplane taking off, and eventually you're going to run out of gas and got to land. And if you don't have your landing license, something bad is going to happen. And she went through devastating, injuries, and we really focused literally a year on eccentric strength in the weight room and deceleration technique, both lateral sprints, decelerating, and linear sprints with deceleration. And, I like to say, knock on wood, she's been playing volleyball for 14 years now. Couple minor injuries here and there, but nothing major like she originally had, and played pro volleyball overseas and plays beach volleyball, and makes a living out of playing volleyball now, and is at our gym to this day, still doing the workouts that we outlined and the warm-ups that we outlined in this speed manual, because she's living proof that deceleration and landing technique is a foundational aspect of all sports.
Would you say that's probably one of the biggest things that's overlooked when it comes to speed training, is the deceleration part of it?
Without a doubt. I'd go to any high school, even college or professional level. If guys are running sprints, girls running sprints, how many times have you actually seen them focus on and teach the technique of decelerating? What we show in the DVD is how to do it in practice, in the gym. If you're not teaching them the proper technique, in a controlled environment at slower speeds, how on earth do you think they're going to be able to do that in a game with the adrenaline going, and you're going 100 miles an hour? So, you need to rehearse that so it becomes subconscious on the athletic field. And if you're not doing that in the weight room, and you never give your athletes that knowledge and that information, you're really doing them a disservice.
Okay, now interesting thing is I've been doing speed training for years. I followed your stuff. I've got basically everything out there when it comes to speed training. But what is it that makes this different? This product different from the other things that are out there?
Once again, I think, the first thing you're going to look at is it is geared towards team sport athletes. Literally
Okay.
all the information I've ever gotten on speed training was from track coaches and track athletes. And working with football and baseball and volleyball and wrestling and MMA guys, I always had to kind of tweak what I learned from the track coaches and say, man, how does this fit into a football player? How does this fit into a female volleyball player? This goes over how to train for team sports. Even through the start variations that we show when training for acceleration, we start from all different angles and give examples of many different sports. The workouts in here have been done with over a dozen different sports, athletes from a dozen different sports. So this is really geared towards team sport athletes, which makes up, a much larger percent of the population than just track athletes. And going off of that, I think the main difference and the thing that people are going to love this product for is the application of it. Not only do we go over proper sprint technique, landing technique, change of direction technique, not only do we give you our best drills, we have over 60 practical, proven, tried and true drills that have made our athletes faster, but we show you how to incorporate them into a weekly plan. We show you how to progress the exercises. It's not just, hey, here's 60 exercises, kind of pick whatever ones out you like. We say, here's from start to finish, progression of the actual exercises, and then how to incorporate them. We have a whole section in the manual, speed training integration, how to integrate speed into your program, whether
That's huge.
yeah, we have the high-low approach, which a lot of people follow. My West Side for Skinny Bastards program has been very popular. We give you 3 or 4 different templates of how to incorporate speed into that. So we show you how to apply it, which is huge. I've never seen that in another speed training product. Most of them are just a bunch of drills.
Very cool. Very cool. And obviously this goes without saying that this is safe for everybody who, for the athletes and the coaches who are going to be using it with their athletes, right?
Everything is, like I said, it's science behind it, practical. Even the subtitle, I wanted to make sure we had the words practical and proven, because this isn't just something we've dreamed up. This is a 15-year, piece of work, this manual and DVD. This is data that we've saved. You had to see, some nights up all night, not sleeping with reports of athletes that, man, I tested 14, 15 years ago, and with 15 years worth of data and knowledge, and a 3-man collaboration, which is huge also. Myself, Smitty, and Mike Madango, who works with me at my gym, and actually is, went from being cut from his baseball team to a 2-time All-American. He was almost like one of the experiments, of some of the methods that we reveal in this manual. So it's very cool that now he's training baseball players and athletes using what worked on him. So, 3 brains and 6 eyes looking at things are, always better than 1 or 2. So it's the most comprehensive product of its kind on the market. I feel very comfortable saying that.
Okay, and the last thing, I'm kind of curious, because you got some of the stories have been fascinating, and you talk about the girl with her ankle, and some of the things, the analogies have been really cool. I know there's a story or something that you helped using this stuff, NFL athlete or something like that we talked about earlier. Phil, tell me about that story, because I didn't hear all the details. I want to know more about this, like how this was helping him.
Yeah, one of my all-time favorite stories is Miles Austin, the Miles Austin Project, I always call it. Many of you now know who he is. He's a household name, all-pro wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys. But when he came to me, he was a small school college wide receiver from Monmouth University. And the knock on him was he was slow. He played at a small school, and he was too slow to play at the big time. So his best 40 time at the time was a 4.6. His agent at the time said he talked to a bunch of NFL scouts. They said if he doesn't run a 4.4 something at the NFL Combine, they're not even going to take a look at him, because not only is he inexperienced, but he's also, a step too slow, not worth their time. So whether you think the 40-yard dash translates to the NFL field or not, the bottom line was, in particular, this case, he had to run a certain time, otherwise he wasn't going to get a shot to go show what he could do on an NFL field. So, we had, I think it was 12 weeks at the time. And again, I watched him run faster than your average person, by all means, really, really just good natural athlete. But kid took 7.5 steps to run 10 yards and electrically timed. We took his time, and I think it was like a 1.77. We have all the details in the manual and in the DVD, but we looked at him, and he was very strong. One of the few athletes that showed up in my gym strong enough, and I'm a huge proponent of strength, but I could say making him stronger probably wasn't going to, do much for him. He had huge legs, thighs, powerful,
Right.
squatted over 500 pounds deep. We found immobility in his hips because he was kind of just big and tight, and a lack of understanding of technique. And he was a track and field guy. He threw the javelin and did some sprints. So the start with running 100 meters is a little different than the 40. The 40 is shorter. Therefore, the start plays even a more important role.
Right.
So we changed his stance. We ended up taking a 1.5 steps off of his first 10 yards. So he went from 7.5 steps to 6 step, landing right on the 10-yard mark. And through mobility and technical training, and at the NFL Combine, he ended up hitting that 10 in 6 steps, and he ran a 4.47, which was like, one of the best phone calls I've ever gotten in my life when we knew we hit that 4.4. And sure enough, Bill Parcells was with the Cowboys at the time, called him up, said, we're going to take a shot on you. We love your size. We love your speed. 2 years later, he ends up signing a contract for over $50 million with the NFL. Changed his life. And one of my favorite stories, because, what he's done on the field is all him. Kid's a natural athlete. He did that all on his own. But it's very cool to be a small part. And he'll tell you, if you ever met him, he'll be like, man, we worked on that 40. And it's funny because in the speed manual, I was training him before YouTube and even my website was as popular. But I have a snapshot of the last 40-yard dash he ran with me before going to the Combine, because we changed his stance. And I actually do a whole chapter, a bonus chapter in the manual, the 7 steps of how I changed his stance and how the new way that we coach the 40-yard dash stance now for athletes. It made a huge difference in setting him up for a better 10, just put him in mechanically a better position to run the 10 and take fewer steps. So there's a snapshot of Miles Austin before he was Miles Austin, so to speak, in his stance before he was a $50 million man. So it's a story I'm very proud of and will probably tell until the day I die.
Yeah, and that's a pretty cool story to hear stuff like that, and probably makes you feel pretty awesome too once you see those kinds of results.
Yeah, and it couldn't happen to a nicer kid, and you see the work they put in, and I think that's what's very cool with what we do and the coaches that buy this product is being the guys behind the scene. Everybody just watches athletes on TV, or you read about a high school kid in the paper, but to be part of that crew that is there when nobody's watching, so to speak, and putting all the time and effort in, and using the techniques that you'll see in this manual and this DVD, and being one of the guys behind the scenes is very cool. And there's nothing more powerful you could do to change an athlete's life, whether it's high school level, just making the varsity team, or having a guy become a $50 million man. They're both equally fun to be around, and we're real proud of that.
That's cool. I think we'll leave it at that. We'll wrap it up here. And Joe, I appreciate your time coming on, sharing the why and a couple interesting stories about what's going on, what you got going on with this product, and how it's helped a lot of people. And I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you doing the interview.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.